At 83 years old, Barbra Streisand, born in 1942, crowned with Oscars in 1969 and 1977, and still topping charts in 2023, remains a living legend. Yet, behind the spotlight, she has shared moments so raw they've left fans in tears. From losing her voice briefly after narrating her 48-hour memoir to confessing lifelong struggles with criticism and inequality, her story is both triumphant and heartbreaking. What happened to Streisand at 83 proves that even icons carry fragile truths. A legendary voice gets quiet. In 2023, at the age of 83, Barbra Streisand sat in her Malibu studio with a microphone not for a song, but for a story. She had just completed the narration of her monumental memoir, My Name is Barbra, a tome of nearly 970 pages, spanning 966 official pages, plus appendices and notes. The audiobook stretched almost 48 hours in length, an odyssey of memory, regret, and triumph. By the end, her voice was hoarse, but the strain was not illness. It was the price of truth spoken aloud. Fans feared the worst when whispers surfaced that Streisand, whose voice had been thunderous since Funny Girl in 1964, was suddenly struggling to speak. Yet her publicist quickly clarified the hoarseness was nothing more than exhaustion. "She's not sick," one insider insisted in November 2023. "She just poured her entire soul into recording nearly 2 full days of audio." For an artist whose voice defined generations, even a whisper of decline felt terrifying. But it was temporary. Streisand herself laughed off the speculation in interviews with People in 2023. "My throat needed rest, that's all," she said, brushing away concern. She had sung across 6 decades, commanded stages from Broadway in the 1960s to global arenas in the 2000s, and never let weakness define her. Her hoarseness was not a curtain call. It was a reminder that even icons, when they give everything, need to pause. "Don't worry," she added, "I'm not done singing yet." For fans who feared a farewell, those words carried relief. The strain came not from fading strength, but from unmatched effort. At 83, Barbra Streisand was still writing, still narrating, still defying the gravity of age. The voice that gave the world Evergreen in 1976 and Woman in Love in 1980 was not gone. It only needed rest. What could have been read as silence was, in truth, an intermission, a pause before her next chapter began. That next chapter arrived swiftly. Only weeks after the memoir, Streisand unveiled a new project, The Secret of Life, Partners, Volume 2. It was not nostalgia, not a swan song. It was collaboration with legends old and new: Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Ariana Grande, Hozier. Released in late 2023, the album marked her return to the Billboard charts, extending her streak of top 40 releases to more than 6 decades. If her memoir gave words, the duets gave music, and the voice was back. A new duets album that defies time. In November 2023, Streisand released The Secret of Life, Partners, Volume 2. Her follow-up to the wildly successful Partners album from 2014. At 83, most artists might have retired quietly, but Streisand defied expectation. The new duets featured Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Ariana Grande, Hozier, and even a reimagined track with her longtime friend Barry Gibb. Critics marveled. Not only had she gathered legends, she had bridged generations. Few artists can claim relevance across 60 years. Streisand just extended the record. Billboard confirmed what fans already knew. Streisand was still a chart presence. With this release, she stretched her streak of top 40 albums across 6 different decades, from the 1960s to the 2020s. No other female artist has matched that longevity. The album debuted in the top 10 in November 2023, proving that her artistry was not frozen in time. While peers struggled to keep pace, Streisand was still reshaping popular music in her 9th decade of life. But what struck listeners most was intimacy. Streisand explained to Vanity Fair in 2023, "If I can identify with a lyric, I sing it well." Each duet felt lived in, not nostalgic. Her voice, slightly worn, richly textured, intertwined with younger artists like Ariana Grande in ways that transcended generation. With McCartney, she revisited the bittersweet romance of the 1960s. With Dylan, she carved verses into weathered poetry. These were not just songs, they were conversations across time. At the core was mastery. Even in studio sessions described as grueling by producers, Streisand commanded like the director she has always been. At 83 years old, her standards had not softened. She corrected notes, debated lyrics, and guided orchestras with precision. Far from a farewell, The Secret of Life announced that Streisand was still shaping culture. Not from nostalgia, but from presence. Age had not silenced her. It had given her voice new resonance. Yet the duets were only one part of her creative flood. In November 2023, alongside the album, Streisand published her long-awaited memoir, My Name is Barbra. Nearly 1,000 pages long and spanning 48 hours of audiobook narration, it became both confession and chronicle. Fans who had known her only through performances suddenly heard her voice on the page, unfiltered, unguarded. If the album was dialogue with others, the memoir was dialogue with herself, and it revealed more than music ever could. Opening her heart. My Name is Barbra, published in November 2023, was more than a memoir. At 966 pages, it became a monument to a life lived in the public eye since 1962, when Streisand first appeared on Broadway in I Can Get It For You Wholesale. She corrected interviewers who misstated the length, not 992 pages, 966, because, as she told Vanity Fair, every detail mattered. It was a book not just of facts, but of feelings. And it was her most vulnerable performance yet. She read every word herself, producing an audiobook nearly 48 hours long, a record among celebrity memoirs. By the end, her voice was hoarse, but not from age. It was the sound of a woman pouring out 8 decades of triumph, heartbreak, and resilience. In one chapter, she revisited Funny Girl in 1964. In another, she relived her Academy Award win for Funny Girl in 1969 and her second Oscar for A Star is Born in 1977. Her career unfolded in her own cadence, not in the voices of critics. The memoir delved into losses too. Her father's death in 1943, when she was only a year old, the criticism of her looks in the 1960s, her lifelong struggles with stage fright. She wrote of love with James Brolin, her husband since 1998, and of her fierce advocacy for women's health through the Barbra Streisand Heart Center at UCLA in the 2000s. Each page blended history with emotion, reminding readers that behind the legend was always a human being. For fans, My Name is Barbra was a revelation. At 83, Streisand had not only lived history, she had shaped it. Yet, she had rarely shared herself so openly. The memoir, like her duets, carried the weight of intimacy. Every story, every correction of page count, spoke of a woman who still cared fiercely about detail, truth, and meaning. Her voice, whether sung or spoken, remains one of America's most essential instruments, and it has no plans of quieting yet. But memoirs and albums weren't her only statements. Streisand also used her platform to demand justice. In interviews promoting the book in late 2023, she returned to an old wound: the pay disparity she faced in the Meet the Parents sequels of the 2000s. While Dustin Hoffman was paid millions more, she received a fraction. At 83, she was still fuming and still fearless. To move forward, we must confront Streisand's refusal to be silent about inequality. Fuming, but not finished. In 2004, when Meet the Fockers premiered, audiences laughed at the quirky chemistry of Barbra Streisand and Dustin Hoffman. What fans didn't know was that behind the humor, a quiet injustice simmered. Streisand, already a two-time Academy Award winner, Best Actress for Funny Girl in 1969, Best Song for A Star Is Born in 1977, was paid dramatically less than Hoffman. 2 decades later, in interviews tied to her memoir in 2023, she admitted, "I never forgot." The disparity wasn't minor. Reports indicated Hoffman's pay dwarfed hers by millions. Streisand, who had by then sold over 151 million records worldwide and directed films like Yentl in 1983, found herself undervalued. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. "I don't apologize for asking for what's fair," she told People in November 2023. At 83 years old, she was still fighting the very inequities that defined women's careers in Hollywood across the 20th century. This candid fury was not new. Streisand had long challenged Hollywood's hierarchies. In the 1970s, she battled producers to direct Yentl, when women directors were virtually unheard of. In the 1990s, she called out critics who judged her appearance more than her artistry. Her confrontation over Meet the Fockers wasn't simply about her, it was about every actress who had been told her worth was less. "If I return for another sequel," she said in 2023, "they'll need to pay me properly." For her fans, this was classic Barbra. At 83, she wasn't fading into nostalgia or retreat. She was still reshaping the rules, demanding fairness, and speaking truth even when inconvenient. Her refusal to let go of that disparity symbolized more than personal grievance. It was the echo of every woman fighting for equal pay in the workplace. Streisand's fire had not cooled. If anything, it burned hotter, aimed squarely at injustice. But while her words sparked headlines, her actions told an even richer story. In 2023, Streisand made a surprise donation to the Hampton Synagogue in New York, honoring her publicist and friend Ken Sunshine. Their partnership had lasted more than 30 years, spanning her concerts, films, and political activism. For Barbra, generosity wasn't performance, it was intimacy. To understand her heart, we must step away from the spotlight and into her quiet gestures of loyalty and love. Giving back with grace and generosity. In October 2023, the Hampton Synagogue announced an unexpected gift, a donation from Barbra Streisand in honor of her longtime publicist Ken Sunshine. Sunshine, who had guided her public image since the 1990s, was more than an employee. He was a confidant, a strategist, and a friend. Streisand's gesture was both affluent and deeply personal, a way of saying thank you for decades of devotion. For fans, it was a glimpse into the private Barbra, loyal, generous, grateful. The synagogue itself, located in West Hampton Beach, has been a hub of culture and faith since the 1990s, supporting not only its Jewish community, but broader humanitarian causes. Streisand's gift honored Sunshine's commitment to service, bridging her celebrity with a community far removed from Hollywood. It was a reminder that behind the sequins and stage lights, Streisand had always been anchored in gratitude. Her donation wasn't about headlines, it was about relationships. This wasn't an isolated act. Across her career, Streisand has given millions to causes she believes in. In 1986, she established the Streisand Foundation, funding projects from environmental protection to LGBTQ+ rights. In 2012, she donated $10 million to Cedars-Sinai for cardiovascular research, launching the Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Center. Her philanthropy reflects the breadth of her interests: civil rights, climate change, education, and health. The Hampton Synagogue gift in 2023 was simply another ripple in a lifelong tide of giving. Fans who know her primarily as the star of Funny Girl or the singer of The Way We Were may not always see this side of Streisand. Yet, at 83, her legacy is as much about generosity as about performance. Each donation, each gesture of loyalty becomes part of the portrait. Behind the headlines of pay disputes or memoir confessions is a woman who has always given back, with grace, precision, and sincerity. And yet, Streisand's philanthropy has never been scattershot. One cause, in particular, has defined her later years: women's cardiovascular health. In the 2000s, she learned that heart disease, not breast cancer, was the leading killer of women in the United States. Outraged at the gender gap in medical research, she funded the creation of the Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Health Program at UCLA. To see Streisand's impact, we must trace how her voice turned not only to music, but to medicine. Heart health isn't just personal. In 2007, Streisand donated $10 million to UCLA, funding what would become the Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Health Program. Her motivation was stark. Despite women representing half the population, less than 35% of participants in cardiovascular research were female. Heart disease is the #1 killer of women, she told People in 2012, yet most studies focus on men. At 65 years old, she transformed outrage into action, building an institution to change the balance. The program, based at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, focuses on research, education, and prevention. By 2023, it had trained hundreds of doctors, funded dozens of studies, and educated thousands of women about risk factors. Streisand herself remained active, attending galas and fundraisers, using her platform to push awareness. For fans accustomed to her stage presence, this was another kind of performance. Not for applause, but for survival. Her voice, once filling concert halls, now echoed in hospital wings. Her advocacy expanded globally. In 2018, she co-wrote op-eds for USA Today and The Huffington Post, urging lawmakers to close the gender gap in medical research. In 2020, she launched virtual events during the pandemic to continue raising funds. At 78 years old, when many retirees slow down, Streisand pressed harder. She linked artistry with activism, proving that fame could be a lever for health equity. For her, the stage had simply shifted. By 83, Streisand's legacy was clear. She was not only a singer, actress, and director, but a public health advocate. Generations may remember her for "Don't Rain on My Parade" or "Yentl," but countless women will live longer, healthier lives because of her interventions. The Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Health Program stands as her enduring gift. Fame gave her a platform. Outrage gave her purpose. Action gave her legacy. But even amid philanthropy, albums, and memoirs, Streisand's life is not only about public crusades. In July 2023, she marked her 27th wedding anniversary with James Brolin, posting a rare, heartfelt tribute. For a woman often guarded about her private life, the message was striking. It revealed joy, partnership, and tenderness. To continue, we must leave the stage and enter her home, where, at 83, Barbra Streisand has found a love story as enduring as her songs. A memory, a marriage, a moment of joy. In July 2023, Barbra Streisand and James Brolin celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. For two titans of Hollywood, their marriage has been remarkably enduring, beginning in 1998 after both had lived full lives apart. Streisand, then 56, had resisted marriage for years after a string of romances. Brolin, born in 1940, had endured two previous divorces. Yet, together, they built a union that surprised skeptics and delighted fans. Their anniversary tribute felt intimate, rare softness from a woman who has spent decades guarding her private world. The message was simple but deeply moving. 27 years and counting, she wrote on social media, paired with a candid photo of the two. For Streisand, who has lived in the public gaze since her 1962 Broadway debut, this openness was unusual. Friends noted that she typically shielded her emotions, preferring to control her narrative. But with Brolin, she allowed vulnerability. That public outpouring was less performance and more revelation. At 83, Barbra Streisand was still in love. Their partnership has survived storms. Streisand's fame, her relentless work ethic, and her perfectionism could easily have clashed with Brolin's independence. Yet, since their wedding in July 1998, they have supported each other's careers. Brolin accompanied her on tours in the 2000s, while she supported his television roles in shows like Life in Pieces in 2015 to 2019. Their marriage became proof that even in Hollywood, a place notorious for brief unions, love can endure across decades. For fans, the sight of Streisand happy, settled, and still glowing in love was profound. It softened the grandeur of her legend, grounding her story in something universal: partnership. At 83, her heart was still open, not just to music or to causes, but to a man who had become her steady companion. The anniversary message resonated not because of celebrity, but because of its humanity. It was Barbra, unguarded, still capable of joy. But Streisand's joy in marriage has not slowed her artistry. Rumors of retirement swirled after her memoir in 2023, but she dismissed them. "I'll work as long as I can," she told people. At 83, she was still recording, still releasing albums, still entering the studio with precision. Her refusal to retire was not denial, it was defiance. To understand her present, we must see how she rejects nostalgia. She is not closing the book. She is still writing, still performing. By late 2023, as The Secret of Life, Partners Volume 2 hit the charts, speculation mounted. Was this Streisand's farewell? At 83 years old, after a memoir nearly 1,000 pages long and decades of tours, surely she was closing her career. Streisand silenced the question. "I'll work as long as I can," she insisted. Her voice, slightly hoarser, carried no regret. She was not leaving the stage. She was redefining what it meant to perform at her age. Her refusal to frame her work as nostalgia is striking. When she duets with artists like Ariana Grande or Hozier, she does not treat them as youthful companions, but as equals. When she re-records classics, she reinvents them with the wisdom of 6 decades. Her art is not a museum. It is living, breathing. In 2023, her Duets album entered the Billboard Top 10. extending her streak to 60 years of charting records. That is not nostalgia. That is relevance. Streisand has often resisted the idea of endings. In the 1990s, she announced a farewell tour, only to return in the 2000s with new concerts. By the 2010s, she was releasing new studio albums like Encore, Movie Partners Sing Broadway in 2016. Each return has carried a message. Art is not finite. As long as she feels passion for a lyric, she will sing it. Retirement, she implies, is only for those who have run out of truth to tell. For her fans, this continuation is both comfort and gift. At 83, Barbra Streisand is still shaping her story, not resting on it. She refuses to be embalmed in nostalgia. Instead, she insists on creating. Her legacy is not a museum of past triumphs, but a living narrative. Every album, every performance, every gesture is proof. Legends do not end. They evolve. And Streisand, even now, refuses to stop evolving. Of course, the hoarseness after narrating nearly 48 hours of audiobook raised questions. Was her voice finally fading? Streisand answered with candor. The cracks in her voice were not weakness, they were authenticity. Age had not dulled her artistry. It had deepened it. Each imperfection became a new kind of strength. To understand her present, we must listen differently. The voice of Barbra Streisand at 83 is no longer flawless, but it is richer, heavier, and more human than ever. Her voice. When Streisand confessed to being hoarse after narrating her memoir in November 2023, headlines spread. For a singer whose voice had filled Carnegie Hall in 1963 and the Grammy stage in 1964, any sign of fragility felt like tragedy. But she clarified, it was exhaustion, not illness. Recording nearly 48 hours of audiobook would have left anyone strained. At 83, Streisand proved that her voice was still present. It simply carried new textures. Lines of history etched into sound. The hoarseness was not loss, but evolution. Fans who listened to her duets with Paul McCartney or Bob Dylan in 2023 noticed the difference. Her soprano, once crystalline, now bore warmth, grit, and gravitas. Every crack conveyed decades of love, loss, and survival. When she sang The Way We Were, recorded originally in 1973, it sounded not like repetition, but reflection. The voice had changed, yes, but it had grown deeper, more truthful. Critics echoed this view. Vanity Fair in 2023 wrote, Streisand's voice, worn by time, has become a vessel for wisdom. What once soared now lingered. What once dazzled now comforted. Fans accustomed to her perfection in the 1970s and 1980s found a new beauty in her vulnerability in the 2020s. Streisand's artistry had matured into something beyond technique. It had become authenticity. She no longer sang as the ingenue. She sang as the survivor. At 83, the richness of her voice became metaphor. Every line carried the years since Brooklyn in 1942, when she was born, through Broadway in the 1960s, through Oscars in 1969 and 1977, through tours in the 2000s. Her voice is history, not in decline, but in resonance. For fans, it is not weaker, it is truer. Barbra Streisand has not lost her voice. She has transformed it into something that moves hearts with even greater power. And so we arrive at the present. At 83, Barbra Streisand is not defined by silence or endings, but by continuation. Memoir, music, activism, and love. Her journey is not tragic, but luminous. She still surprises, she still gives, she still loves. For those who weep at the thought of her final days, the truth is far gentler. Barbra Streisand is still here, still creating, still moving hearts. Her legacy is not past tense. It is fiercely alive. At 83, she moves hearts still. Barbra Streisand's life is a tapestry woven across 8 decades. From her birth in Brooklyn in 1942, to her Broadway breakout in 1962, to her first Oscar in 1969, to her duets album in 2023, she has never stopped. At 83, she remains not only relevant, but essential. Her memoir spans nearly 1,000 pages. Her audiobook runs 48 hours. Her duets stretch across 6 decades of Billboard charts. She is proof that artistry, once lit, need never dim. Her work is not the only legacy. Streisand's philanthropy, millions donated to the environment, civil rights, and women's health, lives on through institutions like the Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Health Program at UCLA. Her marriage to James Brolin, entering its 27th year in 2023, shows joy beyond spotlight. Her candid fight for pay equity reveals courage. Her generosity toward her publicist Ken Sunshine in 2023 reflects gratitude. Each facet of her life reveals depth far beyond celebrity. Fans may weep when they hear cracks in her voice or see her step back from tours. But those tears are not grief. They are reverence. They spring from the miracle of longevity, from the gift of hearing her still sing, still speak, still fight. Legends like Streisand don't fade. They evolve. Every note she sings at 83 is heavier with truth than any note at 23 could have been. Age has not muted her. It has crowned her. And so, Barbra Streisand moves hearts still. She is not tragedy. She is triumph. Her story is not finished, and her voice is not gone. At 83, she continues to create, advocate, and love. If tears come, they are not for loss. They are for gratitude. She is not just a star. She is a force of nature, as luminous now as in 1964, as vital in 2023 as ever. Barbra Streisand's heart and her art remain eternal. Barbra Streisand's journey at 83 is not about endings. It's about resilience. Her nearly 1,000-page memoir, her duets with Paul McCartney and Ariana Grande, her philanthropy in women's heart health, and her enduring marriage of 27 years to James Brolin reveal a woman still creating, still loving, still giving. Fans may cry, but not from tragedy, from awe. Streisand's voice, worn yet richer, reminds us that even in age, true artistry doesn't fade. It deepens.